Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Strategies for Unlocking Knowledge Management in Microsoft 365 in the Copilot World, featuring Microsoft MVP Drew Madelung. My name is Vlad Katrinescu. I'm a technical evangelist at Cisco, as well as a Microsoft MVP from Montreal, Canada. Now, a lot of you may already know Cisco as a company, but for those of you who don't, let me briefly introduce you. Sysket is a Microsoft 365 software development company founded more than 14 years ago, and we specialize on Microsoft 365 governance and security, and of course, tools for SharePoint administrators. We currently have over 3,500 customers around the world, ranging from small businesses to large corporations. We have 4 products, including our award-winning SP Docket for SharePoint On-Prem, as well as our flagship product, which can get you Copilot ready, Cisco Point for Microsoft 365 governance. Just before we start, a few housekeeping items. First of all, the question that we get the most often is, yes, you will get access to the recording of the webinar within a few days. So if ever you need to step out or you want to share this recording with a colleague after, you will have access to that link. After the presentation by Drew, Nicola will give a small presentation about Cisco Point and how we can help you get Copilot ready. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce today's presenter, Drew Madelung. Drew is a cloud solutions architect and a Microsoft MVP for Microsoft 365. He is experienced in a range of technology and specializes in collaboration and teamwork workspaces such as Microsoft Teams, SharePoint, and OneDrive. Drew has helped deploy Microsoft 365 to many global companies while rolling out modern information protection and information governance technologies. He has been a Microsoft consultant for over 10 years and is also a speaker at many Microsoft 365 industry events. I'll now give a warm welcome and turn things over to Drew. And Drew, while you turn on the camera and start sharing your screen, I want to remind everyone we will have a Q&A session at the end. So make sure that you ask questions. You have a Q&A widget on the right side of the screen. And also join me in congratulating Drew, who just got his MVP renewal today. I think, Drew, that is number 9, if I remember correctly, right? So
I'm catching up slowly, Vlad, slowly.
catching up, but MVP for 9 years. So congratulations, Drew.
You too, Vlad. It's a good day today, right? It's fun to
Yeah.
start this off. We talked right before this, and definitely thank you for the intro. Thank you for hearing that, Vlad. And I'm excited to talk today about something that has been a growing world for me. So a little background. So we're talking about knowledge management today, and a little background in my world. I worked with Vlad for a long time. We both come from an IT pro backgrounds, but my role that I've been in is a director, kind of helping companies roll out Microsoft. But some of my history comes from, there was actually a point in my life where I worked a ton with content automation. So there's a little bit of a gap in this world of how I used to build some very big intranet, some very big knowledge repositories, some very robust ways to find and organize data. I actually did work with different people in like the library sciences side of the world of how data should be structured. And that led to a lot of my introductory work into SharePoint over the years. So I built some very big knowledge solutions. And now, so I'm still doing Microsoft consulting, but it's been interesting about how knowledge has started to transform. So my information is all up here, and it's been, as for my 10 plus years of consulting, I've watched knowledge start in one spot of how it used to be in SharePoint on-prem, and now in the Microsoft 365 world, and now especially in the last year of how AI is changing or evolving inside of knowledge, how we're gonna actually deal with this stuff. So my role is helping companies figure that out. And I've been doing this for as Vlad said, 10 plus years. I am approaching that 10-year MVP. Outside of the SharePoint side of the world, I still hang out with my family. I do like to travel a good amount and golf a lot. So I do I do enjoy lots of things outside of this, but my world today is going to be focused all around unlocking knowledge in your organization. What does that mean? So I want to start out to kind of reset the stage with what is knowledge. It's that there's a term that can be very broad that I want to target some very specific scenarios on how it affects you in Microsoft 365 and you in just your general daily life. And then I'm going to talk about CAM, so talk about knowledge management. So what does it look like for a life cycle around knowledge and how are people really starting to digest that? And then we're going to go all into Microsoft 365. So how does that relate to Microsoft 365? What does that mean if I take these bigger words and bring them into tech? And then that's all good, but what do I do going forward? So by the end of this, I'm hoping to share my tips and tricks with what I've done with organizations to help figure out how to transform their knowledge inside of Microsoft 365 once they understand what's important to them. So what is knowledge, right? Like if you look this up, it's going to be very specific to knowing something gained through experience, or it can be being aware of something or learning something. So this idea you're thinking about is something that you know that you've gained, now that you've gained that information from somewhere. And that somewhere is an important way to think about Microsoft 365. So how do I gain that knowledge? Did I learn it from talking with someone else? Did I learn it in a conversation with Vlad? Did I learn it in a meeting with one of my employees? Did I learn it while I was hanging out with my family at dinner? I'm learning, I'm gaining familiarity, I'm gaining information that's going to educate a decision that I'm most likely going to make in the future. So if you think about this, I'm learning something, I'm gaining something, I'm understanding something, and I'm taking that information and I'm going to do something with it. So if you break this down, there is a couple different types of knowledge, and it's important to understand these types of knowledge to understand how we're going to organize and facilitate knowledge in your organization. Because what a lot of people think of knowledge is primarily just explicit knowledge, which is really focused on knowing what knowledge is, knowing this what. So if I have a document in my hand, that is knowledge that exists, that is very hard coded into something that I can consume. It can be a record that I have in a file repository somewhere. It can be a record on my desk. That is knowledge that's very explicit. I can take it, I can do something with it. Knowing what. You then have this layer below the iceberg, which is implicit and tacit knowledge, which is really this soft knowledge skill set that when you bring technology into play, and especially in this hybrid world that we live in, how do we start to share and gain implicit knowledge? So how do we learn skills? How do we learn how to do things like have a webinar like this? How do we learn how to, if you're in sales, how do we learn more sales tactics? How do you learn expertise? You can't just learn how to ride a bike. I can't take a document and say, this is how to ride a bike. That's knowledge on how to ride a bike, and then just go ride a bike. So there is this iceberg of knowledge, and within your organization, you're going to be thinking about implicit. You need to also think about implicit and tacit knowledge, not just this idea of I built a knowledge repository, I put files on a SharePoint site, and people can go find them. Right? It's how do we also engage our employees? How do we engage knowledge sharing? What are those practices that we can have that embrace this people-centric knowledge as well? So as you go deeper into this, you think about what explicit knowledge is. So explicit knowledge is probably our core knowledge base that we're going through. It's the one that we do want to try to get our knowledge to, or our data to, where we can start to learn these things. And if you think about, let's maybe I'm deploying Microsoft 365, and we always write these quick reference guides, or we write these how-to guides, or if you're watching a Pluralsight course, right? Someone is teaching you something, and you are learning through this knowledge. For some process, you are gathering that information. And let's say you're watching a Pluralsight course, I can easily write that down. I can take my notes, and I'm transferring this data. I could give that video to someone else. That is explicit knowledge that I'm learning facts. I'm learning a very specific thing that says you can't share a file externally if this flag is turned off. Right? That's incredibly specific. Or I'm learning what this operating procedure is for how to working with an oil and gas company right now. Here's an operating procedure for how to fill this pipeline. Very specific. Now, when you get into the weeds more, and you think about implicit knowledge, okay, I've taken that Pluralsight course. I've read this standard operating procedure. Cool, that doesn't mean I know how to do it. So I'm not unconsciously able to go do something. I don't know necessarily where to go click to go turn off external sharing. Right? I need to now, but once you do it and you've done it maybe a few times, I can communicate that. So like in doing webinars like this, like I've done these things with organizations. So I've learned that implicitly I know where to go, I know what to do, and I cognitively am aware of those processes that I have to do it. As you start to, let's say I'm working on the oil and gas side, as I start to work with different pipelines, I become more aware of what to do without having to reference that standard operating procedure. So I'm unconsciously becoming aware of that. And think about that knowledge in your organization. How do we start to translate that data to allow people to gain more implicit knowledge? And then you get into the very personal knowledge, which is tacit. So it's not just how does Drew do a webinar? It's not just how does a webinar happen. It's how does Drew do a webinar? How does Vlad do a webinar? How do you can take an instrument, let's say, and you can say, here's how I've done training on how to play the violin. I can play the violin unconsciously, but I'm going to play it in a way that's myself now. I'm going to use my organizational cues. I'm going to learn how to do something, most likely through socialization. So take this inside of your organization. Let's say you have a sales department or an account executive department. How do you start to gain tacit knowledge internally for how to be a better salesperson? How do you become a better project manager? How do you become a better individual in your org? How do I become a better consultant inside of my company? And a lot of that is done through learning from other people, through socialization of how different activities happen, how if I'm on sales calls, I can learn from different people on how they're selling. If I'm on project delivery, I can see how other people are working, and I'm socializing that through communication. So when you think about this from a top-down knowledge perspective, and Microsoft, and kind of how does this relate, you don't just have this technology blueprint, right? You have this concept of what 4 key areas that kind of make up knowledge. So in those stories I told, there's always this point of knowledge acquisition. Am I consuming something through video? Am I consuming something from a document? Where is that information held? Is it held in SharePoint? Is it held in a file share today? Where is it held in other people's brains that we need to go communicate with? And then how am I going to consume that? So am I going to have to go search for it? Am I having meetings to go learn about that? Am I going to a specific knowledge repository to go find that information in my org? And then how am I going to apply that? Am I going to take that to my next sales meeting? Am I going to take that to go recreate new content? A good example for me through all of this would be statements of work or invoices. So very specific things I need to do to build a new statement of work, to go find one that's already been existed, to go share that to my team, and then to go apply that through my customers. Now, inside of that, when you look at this KM architecture, you have not just technology, but you have culture. And this culture part is important to think about in Microsoft 365, because there is an employee experience part of this that you can't just build a repo and people will come. That's not how it will work. You need to think of how people are working together, and then technology can help support how those people are working together today to help improve their knowledge acquisition and distribution would really be our core 2 that we think about for the employee experience. Now, as you go deeper into each of these, so knowledge acquisition, think of this very specifically as existing information today. So the existing statements of standard operating procedures that are out there, the existing people that are in my organization, that is knowledge that we have. We then want to retain that. So a very interesting part about knowledge management is we think about if let's say we build a file repository, stick our knowledge there. Now, great, we've stored a specific type of knowledge, but what about our people? Right? This is a softer subject, but if you lose people in your organization, so let's say you have a high turnover due to let's say poor employee experience, you are actually consistently losing knowledge in your organization because you have this tacit knowledge being lost. I read an article recently that was talking about NVIDIA and how we've seen that NVIDIA has become one of the largest companies in the world, and there's been engineering there that have been there for a very long time, but because of their success over the past couple of years, they have started to lose and retire. A lot of people have been retiring early due to their success, and that is causing a loss of tacit knowledge inside of their organization because they're losing some of their key people because of the success that they've had. And obviously that's not a bad thing you don't want to have, but think about that as from an employee retention perspective, that's also a scenario for knowledge management we need to account for. And as we're distributing this, you're going to start to see it's about cultivating knowledge. So you have to start thinking about how barriers are broken down inside of your organization that are stopping knowledge sharing. So it could be silos, it could be departmental challenges you have between each other. I'll talk more about those at the end. But how do you stop? A big part of this is discouraging knowledge hoarding, right? This is good for me. I'm for myself. I want to have this information. I don't need to distribute it to more people. Yeah, right. So we can think about almost this. I'll go into SharePoint News and how we can start to culture this environment of knowledge sharing. And then applying it will be great. Now that I know I have this, I want to know that this application could a lot be, if I learn this knowledge, I want to help more people with this. So I want to help share this information or cultivate new knowledge around that to ensure we have that big life cycle going forward for having, it's not just a kind of a one-step process. It's you start over, I acquire new knowledge, I share that knowledge, I acquire new knowledge, I share that knowledge. You build this wonderful circle of life to keep knowledge sharing going on. And what we want to get to, this is an older image I found, but I thought it was very interesting that I've kind of thought about this, which is if you think about your organizational ROI, right? Or your personal ROI, you really do get better information as you move into explicit or structured data. So think about invoice processing. I might not know how to do invoice processing, not in AP and AR. So I have a low ROI, I kind of ignore it. So let's say Billy in accounting knows how to do it and he just goes and does it every day. So it's kind of hoarded, it's kind of forgotten about, and Billy leaves, what happens? You have this unstructured data that he might have his own way of organizing invoices, it's not documented. I wanna move that into automation, right? Maybe I wanna move that into automated invoice processing, which then provides explicit knowledge, which has all this metadata about my invoices, and it doesn't really require the same tacit knowledge that required in the past. So we do want to think about how we can move our org. You're obviously not going to get everything in active and explicit, but how can we start to identify scenarios that can bring us away from that forgotten knowledge and start to elevate knowledge to make it more explicit, active, or structured. So the way people are still doing this today is still email, right? This is a couple years old, but I'm sure people are still seeing this today, that knowledge sharing is still primarily through email. So you need to be aware of this as we're communicating with people, as you are thinking about knowledge. But then coming up behind that, we're looking at intranet meetings, file sharing. Those are very, very powerful solutions that are not going anywhere. The intranet is not dying, right? We need to have locations that people can come and look for information. Let's think about when employee experience, when someone starts in the first day of school, or first day at the office, where are they going to go? How are they going to learn? You can't just send them to a knowledge sharing tool or send them to Copilot with a prompt and say, go figure it out. Right? Like I wouldn't even know what to type. How do I know where to go if I just have a Copilot prompt in front of me? I need to have email communications, chat communication. I need to have meetings. I need to have an intranet where knowledge exists that I can go learn about some of this information. So these are staying consistent inside of the world today, even with Copilot. So as we move into more knowledge management, think about there's so many different ways that we can think about sharing knowledge and building knowledge management, from mentoring, communities of interest. So we think about our areas where we can start to share information internally. Unmanaged repositories. I just want a file, I want to collaborate on it today. I want to go watch webinars just like we are today. I want to have a managed repository or SME knowledge transfer, so like very dedicated time for learning. I want to do lunch and learns. I want to do training. Training is a big part of this. How am I going to learn myself or train other people? Am I going to send people to conferences? So when you look at this, these are ways to manage knowledge. And as you go deeper, Microsoft 365 provides solutions to meet these specific scenarios. And when you think about this in your org, you might be doing some of these well, and you might be doing some of them poorly. So think about if these are avenues for knowledge management, I can take my Microsoft 365 tools and start to build solutions to support better knowledge management inside of my org. But that is great, right? So that's kind of the structure. Now, how do we, if we say with a SharePoint, we say there's OneDrive, what does this actually mean? So we start to break down the different tool sets. So SharePoint, this is going to be still going to be our primary knowledge location. This is where we're building portals, we're building documents, we're hosting metadata, and we're doing things with automation like SharePoint Premium for content processing to bring this metadata and knowledge out into a form that can be acquired, that can be consumed. So it's both a knowledge repository and a way to consume that knowledge. But that, I would say actually SharePoint can be very explicit, right? I'm looking at very explicit knowledge that I'm consuming. Viva starts to move into that tacit knowledge and implicit knowledge area, which is I want to learn from other people. I want to find different answers about the questions that I have, or learn skills from other people, learn what skills other people have, or also find ways to train myself up. So much more socialization side of knowledge sharing that you don't necessarily get with SharePoint, where I'm consuming something that's just flat. And Teams brings that even more into the implicit side. Teams is not your company knowledge repository. I'm not going to go to Teams and say like that in some channel, that's what's king or for my main data, but it's also where I gain implicit and tacit knowledge inside of my org. I have certain things like town halls, a big one, we now have meeting recordings. Recordings are knowledge that you have that I can come back and consume, but it's one avenue, another avenue that we have that supports more of that implicit tacit knowledge. And search is going to be one of the key ways we find that knowledge. So if I'm a new employee, I'm starting, I'm going to be looking for information to try to find knowledge. And in 365, we have site search, organizational search. We have content query to go get very specific metadata. I'll show you what that looks like, and start to do some curation for knowledge around bookmarks and Q&A, so we can start to target knowledge for the people that are looking to consume it. I made it this whole time without really going into Copilot. So Copilot, what does Copilot bring to this? Copilot provides a great avenue for discovering existing knowledge and creating some types of new knowledge. But it doesn't do all of these other things that Microsoft 365 already does and can do well today. So think of now Copilot as part of your knowledge management solution, but not a replacement for your knowledge management solution or your knowledge management practices that you have. And one of the big things we had, and I think about where this idea for me and this kind of really started, was in Viva Topics. So Viva Topics is being deprecated today, which was a AI-based knowledge repository, AI-based knowledge solution. Copilot will not replace Viva Topics. Viva Topic, there are ways we can start to take AI and enhance our data, which I'll talk about today, but it is not a one-to-one. So we'll talk about metadata and taxonomy and how we have to look at those separately with this in the Copilot world. So before we go further, I do need to make sure we talk about Copilot as a whole, because when I talk about the gaps that it has in the data today, it's important to note why. So Copilot is our LLM for being able to identify and process content that sits inside of our org. So Copilot from 365, it has access to our data. So on the bottom there, it has access to the Microsoft Graph. And what that means is that we can provide a prompt, and it will look at our information inside of our tenant and provide a response to that prompt. When you look at that though, so think about the requirement, the core thing you're looking at is the knowledge that it's gaining or that you're using is based on what's in the graph today. And Copilot does not have access to everything inside of the graph today. So it will decide what's most important. I don't have a way to rank the responses in that. So I can't say, but by default, if I open up the Copilot chat, and there's studio scenarios for this, but if I just open up a chat and I just type in a question or I type in a research I want to do, I can't guarantee, as let's say a knowledge manager, what response will be generated to ensure it's the correct one. So users prompts, it comes back to the graph, it grounds it in other information, uses and returns that information back to you. So it is not a black box. It is awesome, but how do I curate knowledge and ensure that people get that information back to them? You can't really there, because today, and I'll be very clear today, right? This is not, by the time a couple months from now, this could be completely changed. Today it doesn't utilize metadata and taxonomy well. So if you spend a large amount of time building a very robust taxonomy in your organization for how I'm going to tag and identify content, I can't let's say you go to Amazon. I'll take that as, I love this taxonomy example where you can filter on the left and you can browse down to different products and you have a very specific taxonomy. AI doesn't replace that taxonomy filter. If I'm looking for my music, I want to filter down to my artist, the album, the year. I can always search for that or use AI to find it, but I can't use it the same way. In Copilot, it's very similar. It's not that it's not in the graph, but it's not in the graph in a way that I can very easily articulate the question to get the right prompt or the response I'm looking for. And then the huge one for me is to not know your explicit knowledge. So in very large organizations, even small ones, trying to find that key knowledge. So if I'm looking at for a specific standard operating procedure, how do I know that that operating procedure is the right one? That is a biggest point. Like it's not if I'm finding something, I'm looking for something, how do I know that that response is the true response that's important to me? It does not ground this in Viva Engage. So if you've curated a very tacit and implicit knowledge world in Viva Engage, building communities of interest, I can't pull that information back yet. The creation capabilities, you could do things inside of Copilot, but I can't necessarily just go out and create brand new knowledge out of nothing, right? You still require people and humans to come in and do some work to make that happen. And I love thinking about this, but imagine starting a new company and you just have a prompt to go find something. I truly wouldn't know what to do if I just started up and I had a prompt. I don't know how do you know what to ask? How do you really know how to get started? So you have to almost have knowledge about Copilot. You have to have some type of curated knowledge or explicit knowledge about how to work with Copilot before you even know what to start with. So those are some of the challenges, but then you have some major advantages. So we always have knowledge that is going to be in meetings, right? That's a huge, massive future or massive like kind of hole we have in knowledge today, which is where does that knowledge exist after the meeting ends? What if I took bad notes? Copilot can help synthesize and generate knowledge based on that meeting. I can take AI over a very large swath of data and use it to get started with finding explicit knowledge, but maybe not doing research to say, is this the right one? As long as you know, like I need to potentially add more prompts versus just accepting what's replied to directly. It's built directly into apps. That's awesome. I think the ability to talk about employee interaction, so it knows if I'm working with Vlad frequently, that interaction with Vlad would be a higher ranking than if someone I've never worked with. I can generate small swaths of content, like documents or parts of information in a document or parts of information in PowerPoint. I can generate knowledge efficiently, but not necessarily not really that well at scale. And if I think about implicit knowledge, people learn differently. So just because I could sit in front of a Pluralsight course or read the standard operating procedure doesn't mean that that's the best for me. Having this natural language prompt, I can use that to actually start to understand information potentially easier for me because I'm better at analyzing or synthesizing that data based on the way that's coming back to me. So what does that look like? So I'm going to pull up something here. And I'll start over here. And I'll say, so I've been working in, so I pulled up SharePoint, and I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of finding knowledge. So let's say I have been working with these different RFPs, and I've been working with companies like the Graphic Design Institute. I've been working with our wonderful friends over at AdventureWorks. So we always work with AdventureWorks and Southbridge Video. And these are all metadata on the document. So if I look at this information, if I go to pull this up, this doc, pull up this document, look at the properties, you can see this is metadata on the document about AdventureWorks. So I've actually used some specific syntax information here to go pull this information out. And what we have here for RFP provider is metadata that I'd like to search for. So I ran this prompt so you can see it, but if I go into Copilot, and I ran it this morning, this is data in there, and I said, have we done any RFPs with AdventureWorks? And it says there are no records of RFPs with AdventureWorks. So what that means, just as an example, is it's not that the metadata is not searched, it's that it's not necessarily priority, or it's not, I can't just go in and pre-filter it, versus if I came in, let's say directly in the library and started to look up this and I typed in adventure, I would kind of have this more specific knowledge gaining directly in SharePoint versus kind of assuming that I'd have it with inside of Copilot. And that same would be said if I looked for things, let's say I have a bunch of invoices for the Best Company LLC. If I take these invoices and I search for those, what you're going to see is, I'll say, have we done any work with the Best Company LLC? And the answer is yes. Actually, there have been transactions with the Best Company LLC. So what I'm trying to show is that I used Copilot in the same library, both metadata on content, metadata right here, metadata right here, and that response is not always going to be what you 100% want, right? Like it's interpreting data, and it's up to me as the consumer of this knowledge to try to see, is this data appropriate for me? And if I look in it, Viva Engage, we're going to see, I also have the idea of, if I put AdventureWorks in here, I had language that supported AdventureWorks, so I might be able to try to find the person. So obviously it's Ultra and Ultron, but if I was looking for knowledge, this would be a socialistic or a way to use socialization to try to find where companies or where other people in my org have worked with AdventureWorks versus having to go simply look for content. And Copilot didn't pick this one up either, or it won't pick it up because it wouldn't pick this up because it's in Engage today. So there is that gap, right? It doesn't hit kind of exactly what I want. So what should we do with this information? So what I like to think is we focus on what still works, and then we educate our employees on the pros and cons for that. So it's really ensuring when we're deploying Copilot, they know the limitations that Copilot has, and we're reinforcing good practices for things like SharePoint, Viva Teams, and Search. So if we don't want to refocus, we don't want to fully focus on Copilot. We want to prepare our data to make it Copilot ready, and we want to still inform employees that SharePoint, Viva Teams, and Search are still our core knowledge repositories behind the scenes. So SharePoint is still our key solution within Microsoft 365 for knowledge. So there are a ton of options we can do in SharePoint to improve knowledge in our organization. And these can relate to Copilot. So you still want to have curated knowledge repositories. We still want to build dedicated libraries to host these procedures, to host records. We need to provide that. That's still generating that explicit knowledge. We want to be able to tell people about using content queries, so that when I clicked on the search box and I had the little, what I just showed where we could actually filter based on metadata, that's directly inside the library. That's me being able to identify content in SharePoint easier. We can search on top of metadata. So as you get deeper, into this, the world of SharePoint search is still fully supported from a crawl property, managed property. You can build incredibly robust search solutions to tailor your needs. SharePoint news. How do I start to go and curate knowledge and share that knowledge and distribute that knowledge? That doesn't mean that Copilot's going to be the best place to get it, but if I start to create that knowledge in SharePoint news, then Copilot would be able to start to determine and help reason over that information for you. And our favorite intranet sites. So intranet's global navigation, hub sites, none of this stuff is going away. So for you, it's identifying what type of IA you have, what type of home sites you have, still reinforcing strong global navigation practices. As I do this, Vlad, I want to bring you back in because I know you were, I'll kind of keep talking here, but I do want to hear, Vlad, your opinion on some of the intranet global navigation kind of hub site scenarios too, because you worked with the intranets in the past. I'd love to hear some, as I'm kind of going through this, if you want to jump in and share any information you have on, I guess, what do you think, Vlad, on intranets and global nav and how that relates to knowledge in Copilot?
So great question. And like you said, I worked for an intranet company deploying intranets for a couple of years. So got my fair experience with that. And what I learned and what I'm about to share, it's really not technical, is people like to consume content in different ways. And at the end of the day, when we talk about the intranet, when we talk about knowledge sharing, for me, from a purely intranet point of view, is it doesn't matter how, but our end goal is to get the knowledge to the people that need it. Some people, like Drew, are fully high tech. They're going to want to use Copilot. Some people are more old school and they would like to open up SharePoint and then go on, browse the intranet. You still need to provide a very good experience for them. So you need to have that proper information architecture. You need to have that navigation that is clear to use. You need to have that quality data there as a solid base. And some people, we've already seen it, some people, if they work in a factory, they're going to want to have the news printed and put on a wall because they never log into a PC. And this is very far from the cool Copilot stuff that Drew is showing. But your mission is, how do I get the knowledge to my end users? And sometimes it might be a high-end solution. Sometimes it might be a very old school solution, as long as it works. But still, you do need to have that solid foundation. And by having a well-architected intranet, by having a proper global navigation, you not only ensure that everybody can get a great experience, but also that Copilot can better understand your data. Because Gen AI solutions are awesome. They're able to understand a lot of things, but the more information you give them, the better they'll be able to understand it and the better experience everybody will have. And Microsoft has been investing into information architecture now for a couple of years with hubs, connected hub sites. I feel like that space has changed so much, and with the new brand center and changes to the way SharePoint looks, I'm really looking forward to all the new stuff in there. I'm happy I don't work in the intranet space anymore, Drew, that's for sure, because Microsoft is doing an amazing job at doing everything out of the box now.
Can you imagine the times that, I mean, I feel like a lot of this conversation started with me a lot, very specifically was like, just Copilot replace the intranet. And I was like, no. It does not replace the intranet. It is not fixing knowledge management. Like, there are these keys that Vlad just talked about that you said so eloquently, which is that you still need to support get your data in a way that Gen AI solutions can reason over it better, right? Like, how can we utilize home sites, utilize the org assets? Org assets are actually a really big one now with Copilot, that you start to look at org assets and say, what is my key market information? What is my key brand that I want to have in my org? What is the main PowerPoint file that I want to work with going forward? These are solutions you want to take with you and start to enable in your org, if you haven't yet today, to empower your data better for Gen AI. And the bottom, all that premium content processing assembly lifecycle, those will make your metadata better so people can find that information, start to do automatic creation, and start to clean up old content to improve your Gen AI and improve general knowledge. So if people say, how do I know what file's appropriate? Go make sure you're removing old information inside of your org so you don't have to deal with it. So what some of these look like is, if I go in here, intranet still exists. So I'm on Timely, I have a daily bugle out here. You're still gonna be looking at building intranets that target information for your organization. You're still gonna be looking at building global navigation into Microsoft 365 that can come all the way through into SharePoint and also inside of Teams as well, where I could come in here and see my global navigation directly inside of Teams. So you still want to build this culture or this idea of, I'm going to have knowledge centers out there. I'm going to have an intranet. I'm going to have things like a employee directory. These are still, because you're talking about finding people. It's okay to search for someone, but how do I know who's an X-Men department, who's a scientist? How am I able to start to find that knowledge inside of my org that I might not know that exists? If I'm in a SharePoint library, how do I know that I can come in and do specific metadata searching directly in this library versus having to go look for, so I'll take a look at invoice number. I could type in 6. How do I know that I could look for information that there are no invoices that have 6 in there, right? That means I don't have anything that would be under $600. This is a better way to look for content in SharePoint than it is to, that would say you're still building metadata, you're still building portals, you're still building news pages. All of this still ties into good knowledge management best practices that you want to take with you to, in the future, empower you then to work inside of Copilot with that data. So just part of your toolkit for it. As you go further, I talked about employee experience. So Viva is the employee experience suite inside of Microsoft 365. And Viva has a set of tools and scenarios that you would want to use, such as communities of interest. I want to use Viva you can actually use topics in Engage. So it's not Viva topics, but there's topics in Engage. I can do Q&A in Engage. I can do answers. I can do skills. I can do large company discussions. I can do Viva Learning. These all come into play for how am I going to help my internal employee experience really share knowledge through communication. And all of it, I'd say Viva Engage is still heavily underutilized in scenarios like this, and especially the Q&A side Engage. So you get a lot of questions of like, what's important? How do I start to share that personal knowledge, that tacit knowledge? The Q&A side of Engage and the answer side of Engage coming are going to be areas that we can start to bubble that information up so people can start to find it outside of Copilot. So we're still going into Engage, but we're looking for that there. We also have Teams. So I mentioned on Teams, I'd say the biggest thing I'm seeing with Teams is it's not your intranet, right? What Vlad was talking about, we're building intranets in SharePoint. We're not building intranet in Teams. We're consuming them in Teams, but they're not hosted there. But we're sharing knowledge in chat, right? And we're sharing knowledge in meetings, and you are dealing with channels. So there's knowledge in channels. You do want to try to bring your knowledge outside of chat into channels from a retention perspective. And for meeting recordings, we do want, as you start to record those, think about those as knowledge inside of your organization. So recordings, channels, chat, again, not kind of explicit knowledge, but implicit knowledge that you have in your org to better understand what's happening. And last one I'm touching here that you can build on is search. So when people start, they're going to be looking for information. Search is still your key. You have org search, you have site search. That top search bar in M365 is very, very helpful. And think about how you can tailor knowledge to fit that. So building bookmarks, building acronyms. You can do Q&A inside of search. I can do custom verticals or custom solutions to help support searching for that information to try to find knowledge. So if I come into a site and I pull up, I go search here, and I type in, where's the employee handbook? One thing I can do is use these bookmarks or these Q&A in here to help target information directly for that. So if I look at this and I say, where is the employee handbook? I see that this is the link to the employee handbook right here. That's the one I've tailored to the company. If you look below it, you'll see I actually have 2 handbooks listed. So if I didn't use this bookmark in search and someone came in and clicked on this employee handbook, you're going to see this is an employee handbook that I created this morning, written in the voice of a pirate. So I use Copilot to create it. Doesn't stop anyone to show you that that people can't go and create content, call it what they want. So how would I know that this pirate handbook is not the actual handbook I should be using? Because it's called, what have I called it? The employee handbook. Well, this is the right one. So you can use search to do that. This is a fun one. If I pull up Copilot, you could see I could search for handbook and sometimes get the response for a pirate, sometimes I don't. It just depends on, it truly depends on like the person I'm searching. And I've had prompts back and forth of my pirate handbook versus my regular handbook. I could type in, you could do single keywords. So I could type in Drew Madelung. I could type, maybe you want to find key information. So I could put bookmarks out here to say if someone searches for something and they know what they're actually looking for. I could say, how do I reset my password? When I do that, it can prompt me, I forgot my password link. It can link me directly to our changed password information. If I did that in Copilot, it would probably point me, it depends. Sometimes it points me to this, sometimes it points me to the Microsoft language of just how to do an SSPR, a self-service password reset. And when I am searching here, you have verticals. So I can build my own verticals. I can do forums. I can do learning. I can search my messages. This is a very powerful tool to cater to knowledge using more advanced search information up on top. So that sounds all good. As I'm kind of wrapping up here, I want to talk about, that sounds good. So we have all this org information. We have Viva Engage, we have SharePoint, but how do we do this? So you do want to think what are the benefits of knowledge management, right? Why would I want to invest time to do this? By having better knowledge management, you're finding information faster, you're limiting the need to recreate information and having a single source of truth. So if I'm looking for a statement of work that is important to me, I need to know, is this still a valid statement of work? Right? Like these are the benefits. Why am I doing this? I'm working towards these goals. And in your org, I've worked with companies where you have dedicated knowledge management teams or knowledge services team to better improve this. I'm actually working with the knowledge services team today to help find information to do these exact things for a company using SharePoint and AI together. So when you have obstacles, there are a lot of obstacles to think about. Culture, as Vlad talked about, people, I love that one. If you work in engineering companies, I've had ones where they do need to print it out. I've had ones where they need to have their hands on the paper to get information. So you're going to have this culture. You're going to have hierarchical silos where company A doesn't want, or part A, business unit A doesn't want to talk to business unit B. Maybe they don't have the tech. Maybe they don't have this incentive to help other. The internal competitiveness is interesting. Like I want to do better than the other person, so I don't want to share my knowledge. Maybe we have too much information. Again, like if you think about these obstacles, you're going to get stuck because you can't just come up with like one plan and solve it all. It's knowledge management. Like it's just multiple things together. I listed probably 40 things you could do. Can't do all of them. Piece apart the ones that are benefiting you to help find, if you can identify what your obstacles are, and then slowly start to work towards a better culture. And you can improve it by doing things like, honestly, like webinars like this. Internal, I've done ones where we call them appy hours, where you learn about new apps. You can do formal in Q&A. So you do a lot of, I like this idea of having where you do before or after projects, you do Q&A with people to start to document that information. You incentivize people for, I like the one where you incentivize people for doing news. Internally, we're doing a program where you finish a project, you create a new news page about that for SharePoint, about the project, and then you're rewarded kind of through that because that's part of our ongoing rewards program for the year of showing project success. Again, that's allowing a place to publish it. So you need to have that intranet, have internal showcases showing ways to let people share the knowledge that they've had. You want to provide a place for them to learn. If they're on the IT pro side, give them dev tenant access, build dev test tenants, like empower people, like let people go do that. Have non-work related scenarios. So tacit knowledge is really gained through communication. So have these scenarios where it doesn't have to feel as forced for people to communicate, and start to introduce AI into that through Premium or Copilot. So you don't have to be always Copilot from 365, but there are premium scenarios that exist to do automatic AI generation automatic metadata generation. That's really good for knowledge management and conferences. There's some good ones coming up. There always are. Look at the M365 community days. I'd say for the people listening, those are really, really good. And take some of these with you. And if you want to keep talking, my information is here, and I'm sure it'll be up in the slides when they're posted. And I'll stick around for some questions here, but I do want to pass it over to our friends at Qiskit to keep talking about some of their good stuff.
Thank you so much, Drew, for the awesome presentation. And okay, everyone, again, if you have any questions for Drew, please submit them in the Q&A widget. Don't be shy, but before we get to Q&A, we're going to give Drew a few minutes break and turn things over to Nicolina from Qiskit. She'll do a quick demo on how Qiskit Point can help you get Copilot ready and manage your knowledge. Nicolina, are you ready?
Yes, I'm here. Okay.
There we go.
So, perfect. Thanks, Vlad, and thanks, Drew, for all of these valuable insights. And I think that all of us can agree how important knowledge is, especially in this Copilot era. So today I will just try to show you how Qiskit Point can help to prepare your environment for the Copilot from some data management perspective. But first, just to introduce myself, I'm Nicolina and I'm Customer Success Manager here at Qiskit. And for those who are new here, just to briefly explain what Qiskit Point is. So Qiskit Point is visibility, security, and governance platform that is giving you a centralized directory of your workspaces, permissions, and governance actions just to keep your environment compliant. And when it comes to Copilot, it's all about the data, having the right access, and we will just go through that from the security and data governance side. So first, we will focus on this Copilot readiness style, where we've addressed most important security concerns that you should address with the Copilot adoption. The first one that we have extracted here, it's a private workspaces shared with everyone policy. Basically here, we've extracted all of your private workspaces and standalone sites to where those everyone groups can access. And with Qiskit Point, you can easily remove the access from those groups, either manually or by using automation that we have here. Meaning with this automation, Qiskit Point will do it automatically. So Qiskit Point will remove access for those groups without any interference from the admin or the owner side. Then, using the same logic, you can evaluate our other policies that we have here, like workspaces with too many members or workspaces with shadow users. Basically, shadow users are those users that are not members of specific M365 group or associated team, but something has been shared with them, as you can see here. So again, you can simply remove the access for those users, or if you agree with this sharing, you can just accept the risk for a specific time period. So you see, easy as that. Then also, when it comes to the oversharing, one of the biggest concerns that we are hearing all the times are sharing links. So that's why we've extracted different types of sharing links, and you can simply review the sharing. For example, for those company-wide shared links across private teams, M365 groups, or SharePoint sites, like you can see here. So you can get the list of all of your sharing links among the company. And also you can use some filters, for example, sensitivity label on a file level. You can filter those files by the sensitivity, and you can simply remove the sharing link directly from here. Okay, and then lastly, on this Copilot readiness style, we've extracted public teams and groups where you can review all of your public workspaces just to be sure if they are public by purpose or if you maybe need to revert their privacy just to prevent some unwanted data leaking. So that would be some short steps that could help you to prepare for the Copilot, but also Copilot readiness is ongoing work, and we will just need to place some control mechanisms that could help you to keep your environment governed all the time. That's why we've prepared different policies like orphaned workspaces, minimum number of owners, access reviews, lifecycle management that you can configure and apply to all of your workspaces. Our recommendation is to do it by this rule engine feature that we have that will automatically apply different policies to different resources by specific criteria you might consider. So you can see you can choose workspace type or sharing settings, sensitivity label, number of guest users, or any other custom metadata that you might have in your environment. And we've just heard from Drew how important it is to have some metadata enforced. Of course, the main benefit here is just to avoid any mistake and minimize compliance risk, especially if you are working in large environments with hundreds of thousands of sites, and we do support those as well. Also, when we are speaking about policies, it's important to mention that most of the policies, most of the tasks that are created from those policies are being sent to the owners. And that's why it is extremely important to have active owners on all of your workspaces, which you can control with our orphaned workspaces policy. You can do it automatically with our policies, or also you can check that manually with our orphaned workspaces report. So you can get a list of all of your workspaces without active owners, like you can see here. So we have only members, and you can easily add owners from SysKit as well. Also, what I would like to emphasize is access review. Basically, access review is a regular recertification of permissions on a workspaces, where SysKit is sending automated tasks to the owners to review the membership and sharing inside of their workspaces. So here you can create multiple policies with different options, for example, just to check the members, or you can combine it with sharing. You can set up different recurrence period, and then by using our rule engine, you can apply those policies to different workspaces. Because owners know the best who should have access to the content inside of their workspaces. And lastly, but also in connection with the Copilot knowledge, I would like to show you our inactive workspaces report, because with this report, you can identify all of your workspaces without any inactivity in some specific time period. And you can decide if you would like to archive or delete those unused resources, just to be sure that Copilot is accessing the right and fresh information. That would be all from me for now. There is much more in point, and you can discover that by deploying our 21-day free trial version. And now I will pass it over to Vlad and Drew again, because I'm sure that we have some questions.
Thank you so much, Nikolina, for the excellent presentation. Now, Drew, are you ready for some questions?
I am.
Okay, so I do have a few questions here for you, and I'll start with the toughest one for you. How can we replace Viva Topics? Are there any specific tools that you recommend? And I told you I'll start with the toughest one.
So when Viva Topics was in, I went through a little backstory, because I mean, I started with Viva Topics before it was before it was released, and I helped curate, it's a fun way to say it. I helped with that product from the very beginning, and there is not, so I kind of have I had a long history with it. I deployed it for a bunch of customers. There is not a replacement. There is truly not a one-to-one out-of-the-box replacement within Microsoft. The closest we can do, so if you think about what topics did best, right? It was identify and group data based on what's in content. So you could say these are all like it's still on in my company, and if I type in hashtag Microsoft, I can see like the people tied to Microsoft with my name to it. So you can't replicate. What you can't replicate is the people side of it, where you could say I turn this on and I now have all these topics that say these are the files that are Microsoft related. I'm going to create a SharePoint page for those files, and I'm going to connect the people to those files. So what you can do today is start to try to figure out how to get that metadata out using Premium. So autofill columns, I think, is going to be one of our core ones, but it's going to still be very static to like forcing people to go do it themselves. So you can rebuild topics in a way like so let's say I have my intranets, or I have a specific set of sites I want to do it. We can deploy autofill columns. We could do automated taxonomy extraction. That's all that works. But what it doesn't do is connect to people. So there's not a good way built in to replicate that directly. What I've done is, or what I've talked about doing is like transitioning those topics pages to regular SharePoint pages. I mean, they are SharePoint pages, but you take a SharePoint page and you have to have knowledge curators. You could say use search web parts to go filter on all the taxonomy data that we have, so we can automatically pre-fill as content gets loaded. We extract information, and it shows me all of that metadata in a single pane of glass. And then you have to curate the people. So what we've done is assign, you take the same idea of topics where you have to have knowledge managers and curators, and you say instead of automatically identifying that knowledge for you, you have to, on a cadence, come back in and let's say every quarter, come back in and update the people on that page or the context on that page to make sure that still relates to the topic that existed. So the replacement is manual that we have to do today, and it's not great.
Okay, now let's go with an easier one. And unfortunately, I kind of had a feeling about the answer you're going to give to the previous one. I still hoped that there would be something that replaces topics because I loved it.
Autofill columns, I think, will be close. I think autofill columns in the wild are going to be interesting. It's going to be how can you mature autofill columns at scale, right? Like, is there a way I can templatize or deploy autofill columns in a way that happens on like everything is what I want. I like truly everything behind the scenes. And then, yeah, but I can't do that, especially at like a company I'm working with has 60,000 SharePoint sites. I can't do that for 60,000 SharePoint sites.
Okay, so next question, Drew. Microsoft Search has really improved in the past few years from a customizability point of view. In your experience, do you use the default search web parts or more custom web parts such as PNP in order to aggregate knowledge and to display results?
Almost every company, I deploy PNP. The PNP search web part is, if you're not familiar with it, so I'd say the main limitation I have when I look at Microsoft 365 search is you are still required to use that nav, and the nav between org search and site search can be confusing to users. So if I want to build a tailored experience on a site, I want to use like org search, it's challenging. You have to build this home site architecture to make it work, to tailor to like hit that result type. So I always deploy the PNP web part where I can tailor my experience to cross-site collections. And I'm not saying I don't use the Microsoft one. But you use that. It's still limited in the result type. If I can do result type by site, yes, but I am 99 times out of 100, I'm deploying the PNP search web part. The pain with the web part is you have to maintain it. Okay, it's actually there are so many updates to that thing, and it's been, I think it's personally my favorite PNP web part, my favorite PNP build since some of the site provisioning stuff. But PNP 99 times out of 100 to make it work.
Awesome. Okay, last question for you, Drew. What strategies have you used to encourage employees to actively contribute to the organization's knowledge base? Have you tried gamification? And if yes, how do you balance the quality with quantity?
So the two, I'll highlight two that I really like. I think the idea of postmortem or hackathon or something at the end of an engagement. So a common one would be quarterly. So you do something where we actually take a day, and it's not just like writing information or building that knowledge. It's more communication of that knowledge. So I love seeing something at the end of a quarter, at the end of a month, something where you say you have dedicated time to your team that's on the calendar, and you let people go share what they've done, and you empower them to go share it. So I'll probably do one. I'll talk about this webinar. I'll talk about the project I'm doing. I've done one. I've been at an org that was one of the best ones I've done. Not necessarily me, but their culture was at the end of every 12 weeks, we had their execs or their leadership would actually sit there, and each of their teams would come in and present what they've done over the last 12 weeks to let everyone know. And everyone's invited. They kind of shut down the day for 6 hours, and they say, we're all in this room together, and everyone's going to get their 20 minutes of fame to go talk about the last 12 weeks. But it truly lets you know what everyone's working on, what's been successful. It breeds conversations that you can't get. So what they've done is, instead of just like saying, I'm going to gamify people and say, you need to have a news article every week to make sure it covers it. It doesn't need to be as gamified as more of you are letting people go do it. And then if you don't do it, you're like, it's actually the negative gamification, right? Like it actually affects your performance as a company, right? So like for us, it's against our kind of bonus structures. Like you have to, if you don't do that, if you say, I'm not doing anything for the last 12 weeks, it's not necessarily a negative, it's like almost like a negative gamification, which is like, it's just part of the job, it's part of your culture. And so I think that's my main one, is like these general like dedicated time that your leadership starts with. Gamification side to kind of limit the I guess it would be kind of quantity, right? Like I'm just dispersing knowledge all the time just to make sure it's there, is to have a gateway in front of it. So when I've done, or I shouldn't say gateway, different tiers. So we know the governance pyramid that we have that always lives in our SharePoint world is, there's nothing wrong with quantity. I don't think there's much wrong with quantity on the bottom. Like I think if you're wasting keystrokes, or if you're typing blogs, like you're writing little blurbs, that's not necessarily quantity. You can incentivize that, but as it gets higher up, so like if I'm going to take that information and move it towards the intranet, and then that gets more curated, and that's where I would incentivize that gamification more. So let's say if I'm going to have an internal blog post, I want to have one a year. Some things we do is we put them in our company goals for the year. So I'm not going to incentivize like the lower level knowledge sharing, like write a news article, write a page. That's not going to be incentivized. But like as you move up the pyramid, you are going to be incentivized to do that, because it's against your corporate goals. And it's nothing bad if you don't do it, but you're incentivized, like you will move up, you'll kind of gain more experience, your leadership will see you better by having that kind of higher tier. So don't worry about the bottom, like, but put gates up front if the audience is higher.
Awesome. Drew, do you have time for another one? One final one came in.
Yeah.
Okay, so the question is, where would you recommend that where would you create a customer-facing IT support knowledge base of knowledge articles? A requirement would be that Copilot is able to interrogate the articles and provide the correct answer to people's IT support questions. So something that is customer-facing, but Copilot can query it or can access it.
Yep. So then you're jumping straight into extensibility. So that is a limitation you have with Copilot for M365 and customer-facing materials. Is the way but just out of the box is that SharePoint is not customer-facing. You can't go B2C with SharePoint. You can't go B2C with any of that, right? It's just not consumer-focused. So in this exact scenario, I've talked with an organization about this, where we would bring that information. It just needs to be hosted somewhere, and it needs to be added into the graph. That's it, right? Like truly think about the graph connector. Think about Copilot extensibility. So the extension scenario, where what we're going to do is, what we talked about is, we're going to actually bring some SAP data, expose it for the consumer for reports, so they could we would publish the data via Power BI into so that they could see it publicly, well, not publicly, but to their customer. But that data was hosted in SAP. We're consuming it Power BI, but we're also going to bring that data via Graph Connector into the graph into our graph. So then when we query that in the graph, we would be able to let Copilot reason over that data. Now, the tricky part is if you use the Graph Connector, is it's too broad. So you will, depending on how you bring the data in, you would most likely end up in Copilot Studio building something more targeted based on a data source, or coming forward after build, there's a better way we're going to be able to build a plugin and like Teams extensibility against that data. So the answer is it's not going to be in 365. It's going to be in, or you're going to host in 365 and expose, like duplicate the data, which I wouldn't do. I would put the KB in what's on your website and consume that back into the graph. So think about that graph, the visual, and if it's in the graph, it's in Copilot.
Awesome, Drew. Thank you so much, and thank you so much again for joining us on today's webinar. Some amazing knowledge as always, and thank you for all the awesome attendees that joined. Thank you so much for your questions, and we hope you all enjoyed. So if you ever want to learn more about Syskit, make sure you check out the 21-day free trial. You can just, for free, get it in your own tenant, try it out, and see how you can get your environment Copilot ready. So Drew, thank you so much again. Congrats at an MVP, and looking forward to see you all at the next webinar. Bye-bye, everyone.